DJ, thrilled to be here with you today to kick off Data at Scale.
Thank you.
It's really exciting to be able to talk about these important topics with you today. We've worked together on two different tours, really foundational tours to my career, and you've done some great things in both those tours at LinkedIn and Relate IQ. Mm-hmm. And we've sort of learned a lot of lessons along the way. And today's going to be a conversation about a lot of those lessons we've learned, both in those tours and working in the space. Mm-hmm. DJ, you need no introduction in this space. You've been foundational to so many of the problems within the data space, including the initial formation of data science as a field. Having been chief scientist and chief security officer at LinkedIn, role as VP of product at Relate IQ, CTO at Devoted Health, and of course, let's not forget first chief data scientist under Barack Obama at the White House. So definitely played a foundational role, both in terms of how data science is approached as a field, as well as many of the technologies such as Kafka that we all rely on today. As we proceed through the conversation today, we're going to talk about both not only what we build, but we're going to zoom out in the conversation today to really focus on how we as technologists should think about what we build can be good for society, how we should focus around the teams we build, how we can take on the problems that actually push all of us collectively forward. With that, I did want to dive into a little bit around what we should build. And I want to kick it off with a question around what you think some of these foundational things we should be thinking about as data infrastructure, data science folks look like. What are some of these big challenges we should tackle?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me here, and thanks for everybody joining in. I should also say thank you for that introduction. But what people don't always know is how instrumental you were, Daniel, to making all those things happen. So those technologies would not exist without you, and certainly my life would not have been as fun building those technologies without your help. So I appreciate all of it.
Neutral. Thank you.
Where to start on what do we build and how the space is kind of evolving. On one dimension, our lives still suck. We're still spending a ton of time cleaning data. We're still moving data around, writing too much SQL. There's a bunch of pieces that are still the bare bones. We need to get that better. The other side, there are so many exciting things that are taking place. We have this unbelievable amount of new technology infrastructure that's coming in to support large language models, generative AI, computer vision, all of these ecosystems. And then on the other side of this, we have this wide array of technologies that are out there. And so much so that in some ways, it's hard to choose what technology, it's hard to pick which ones you want and how do you stitch them all together to make this work. But if I had to say it, if you look at society, the number of people who are trying to graduate with degrees in data engineering, data science, want to work on AI, this is one of the most exciting times to be in the space of data, AI, and that broader landscape of things.
Great. Now, these are all exciting things. Let's talk about some of the things you worry about getting attention lost on them as we shift this GenAI moment. There are some of these, to your point, foundational problems. What are some of the things folks in this room should still be really focused on, shouldn't lose their eye off of as we move to this new moment?
Yeah. So the first one, I think, which we've seen is, and I think it's very easy for us to collectively gloss over the whole world of just basic data hygiene. There's in the framing of Maslow's hierarchy, one that we used very heavily at LinkedIn was there's food, clothing, water, shelter at the foundation, the bottom of the pyramid. And when you think about that bottom of the pyramid, what is essential really is clean data, organized data, ability to do good work with that data. If you don't have that, when people just sort of slap on the AI products on top of that, whether it's generative AI, it could be computer vision, could be other type things, we're finding that the limits of what we can do, we hit that ceiling pretty quickly. And so the big limiter oftentimes is high quality data. And the organizations that are making some of the best progress on using AI technologies are the ones with good data shops. It's also important to emphasize everyone is focused on generative AI, but there's so much happening in computer vision. Many of the basic statistical techniques still have incredible relevance. And so it's the Gen AI often can feel like that's the solution we should grab, but there's plenty of other ideas out there that gives just as good results.
Yeah, sounds good. And this is one area where we're going to come back to it, but this is where the data folks in the room really have a role to play in Gen AI. With the industry moving forward so quickly, would love to circle back later and talk to you a little bit about how the data folks can sort of act as that guiding force to make sure the data is being used the right way to both make the Gen AI better, but to make sure we're doing right by society.
Absolutely.
Do that for sure. Uh, I do want to shift gears now to how we should be thinking about this from a societal perspective. No doubt Gen AI and what we're building is having and will continue to have a huge impact on the world at large, at people well beyond the tech industry. And so we need to be very thoughtful in how we proceed. Now you've been a big proponent of the multidisciplinary approach when it comes to building these technologies and when it comes to having all the voices in the room. I'd love for you to really dive into that for us a little bit and talk through how we as the data practitioners, as we as the builders should think about bringing these other folks into the fold and make sure we're bringing those perspectives to bear.
Yeah, it's just such an important topic, Daniel. It's like, and for everyone in the audience, this is one of the ones to really emphasize that we get right. What we often forget about, and we think about consequences of what is taking place and what is actually going on. One of the key things that we need to remember is we wield unbelievable power. You know, that classic Spider-Man version analogy of it is, with great power comes great responsibility. We all collectively own that responsibility. What we do with that data, where it goes, all of this is within our scope. And so the basic version, when we looked at this, and we actually did a process when I was just leaving the White House, where we tried to think, should there be an oath for data scientists, just like there's a Hippocratic oath for physicians? And what we came down to at the end of the day is there's actually just a golden rule for data first and foremost, and it's like, treat the data like it was your own loved one's data. Are you treating this data like it was your own kid's data? Are you keeping it secure? Are you keeping it protected? Are you doing all the hygiene things knowing that it's one of your loved ones' data? And very often we skip over that. The second thing I think as we think about these things is how we have to also remember privacy, security go hand in hand. A lot of times we're not thinking about all these other aspects. And then one of the other ones that I would just emphasize, and the reason it's so important to have a diverse educational background, you're learning every day, is you have to be in tune with the societal issues. You have to be really thinking about what's there. And I'll give you a very concrete analogy. So when I was U.S. Chief Data Scientist, and I was thrown into a bunch of problems, there's a perspective that I brought to the table from my life experiences, from the people who've educated me, the people I know, people like you, all the problems we worked on. And I didn't fully appreciate until I had been I had the ability to really sit with other people to understand the implications of how their data was being treated, what the ramifications would be. It would be very specific. So for example, when we're working on thinking about data around rare diseases, there's a population of people who are saying, you know what, I don't care, just use my data everywhere. And oftentimes you see them posting in very public forums, like on Facebook groups, other type things. Okay, great. They see no other avenue to do that. That's totally reasonable. There's another population who are like saying, hey, in the past, and it's particularly here in the United States, we've had egregious violations of trust. Henrietta Lacks, for example, and her data being used without any compensation, any process, all of those things. So how do we get this right?
Yep.
If you're going to get it right, there's a couple lessons I've learned. Number one, you can't do this just from some back office, sort of saying, oh, the customer is out there, or just doing some kind of persona approach. You just can't have personas are like going to the photo store and you see all these frames of people who look like amazing, and you're just like, who are these people? Like, no family looks like this.
Yep.
This kid not
It's
sticking
an
his tongue out.
idealized representation. That's it.
It's idealized.
Yep.
You need you need that, like the real people at the table, not some survey. You need to be talking to them. That is a thing. And the way we say it is the data points have names. They're not just data points. They have names. You need to learn their names. You need to learn their stories. And then you need to be able to communicate and tell others about their stories. Once you're able to do that, then you are now a responsible steward of that data. But until you can do that, you're really just a data scientist in a back office. And we have so much more to offer than just being relegated to that back office kind of role.
That makes sense, yes. Now, once we keep all that in mind and we're being respectful of people's data, we view it at the data as the person, there's the person behind that data point. There's a big aspect to this around problem selection and are we investing in the right areas? Now, of course, you were doing a lot of that as the US chief data scientist. That was the mandate to make sure people's data was being used for their benefit. As those of us in the tech industry, how would you recommend we select problems? Like, how would you recommend we make sure we're not just doing the things that look good on the benchmark tests, but the things that are actually doing good in the world?
Yeah. Well, the first portion of it is actually the mission statement of the U.S. Chief Data Scientist is to responsibly unleash the power of data to benefit all Americans. And so the two components of this are, both to do it in a responsible way, to make sure we're doing it, but also to make sure that we are doing this to benefit everyone. And so it has a very clear mandate to also make sure that we are using America's data to benefit and unlock it for innovation purposes, security purposes, all of that that's in there. So how do we think about our problems? I think one thing that's out there is we've seen the true raw power of data scientists in times that we often forget. Let's take just most recently the COVID crisis. During COVID, who were the people who really showed up first? And a bunch of this is in Michael Lewis's book, Premonition. Obviously, we were one of the teams that showed up to take care of the California COVID response for the first bit, setting up the testing centers, all these different things. But you had all these other groups building models, like the COVID tracking project was the core source of data for the United States. You had versions of this around the world. And so you had this new form of first responder, which is a data scientist. And so you could work on problems like that. You could build out problems around like crisis text line, which is the backbone of 988, which is the national suicide hotline. Things like that to use data in effective ways to help people. There's healthcare systems. There's all sorts of ways to do it. The way I would think about this is, are you, that classic adage, are you using your time? Are you working on the most important thing that you could at that moment in time? Now, that could be aligned with the company goals or other type things. But the key thing that you're having to choose is this maximal in the impact? And the impact is not one dimensional across some OKR, objective key results, key performance indicator. Yep. We often like to think my job is to move X to Y. Your job is to not only think about X to Y, but to think about all the implications of what happens if we move it from X to Y and all the second order impacts, the third order impacts, as well as, is this the right metric? Is this a holistic right thing? Because sometimes, and we saw this at LinkedIn acutely, was you could crank up a dial and get virality, but then you were going to kill the network's effectivity, the ability for that network to be useful for people over time. So we had to be very smart and as a good steward of these things. For those that are gardeners, you can put a ton of fertilizer on the food. Doesn't mean it's going to work. It's a really great idea over time.
Yeah, makes sense. So that's great thinking in our day job as we go about approaching these problems. One other thing I do want to touch on before we move on to culture is around how we can use the valuable skills we all have in this room to benefit the government, our communities around us, society at large. And you've been a big proponent of public service. I think when a lot of people think public service, they think full-time roles. You laid out a lot of where we should go in the U.S. national AI strategy. How should we think about that? How can we give back in a way that potentially works well with our current responsibilities?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the benefits that we have working on these type of technologies is we are literally building the next future of what services and products could take place. And so I am a huge proponent of doing public service. Because my mentor, Ash Carter, late Secretary of Defense, used to say, is like, once you've had a taste of it, you can't go back. You always have to find some way to help. There's always something to do. Now, do you have to go in all full time always? No. There's tons of things locally in your city, your neighborhood. You can ask, like, hey, could we improve a local service? I'll be very concrete. Like here in the SF Bay Area, there's a program around foster kids and trying to figure out how we can improve making sure they're getting connected with the right families, or doing all the, they're getting the services they need. There's a ton of data infrastructure analytics there. There's a service called the U.S. Digital Response that was created in the early days of COVID to help the local counties give services. How often do we get to complain as technologists that we're like, this part of my city sucks, this part of my government sucks? Well, if you're complaining about it, what the hell are you doing about it? You're a technologist, you got all these skills, you got these degrees, and you can't make your town or city better? Then what's as good as your skills? Bring your A game to make better for not only your town, your county, but you can do it around the world. You can volunteer on a program somewhere else around the world to help them out. And the hardest thing is just finding a place where, hey, I can apply my skills, using skills, and do these things. And there's a few areas. You can do it through U.S. Digital Response. You can do it through Code for America. There's a whole ton of others. And there's oftentimes fellowship programs or other things where you take a year off, Presidential Innovation Fellows, other type of things where you go into public service for a year. Could be at the state level, could be at the federal level, could be at the international level. But there are so many places you can take your skills and have an impact. This, when we're talking about this from the Meta Facebook landscape, we often think of the billions of things. You can literally have an impact on someone's lives at a billions of scale when you work on government. You work on the U.S. federal government, you're impacting a couple 100 million people right off the bat because it's the U.S., plus all around the world is because everyone looks to the U.S. at how to do things. You can have massive, phenomenal impact as a result.
Yeah, and I think I remember you saying that you were talking about problems that hit the trillions when you were in that White House role. Those are problems even by our scale are just enormous and can have huge impact.
So our framing when we worked on it was it's got to impact half of the United States population, 50% of the population, impact $1 trillion of U.S. spend, or help a population that has no recourse. So what are problems like that? Healthcare, criminal justice reform, the climate. It's not going to impact half the population. It's going to impact the whole world. And you can go on and on and on about these things. Yeah. Education, so many more other things. So tackling those problems are phenomenal. And now I think something to emphasize to everybody out there is we often think of like, oh, how am I supposed to do it from my company perspective? But, a quick story from LinkedIn time that we got to work together. People don't realize a job matching engine of LinkedIn was designed initially because I had all these friends who were coming back from the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, were leaving military service and couldn't get the jobs that they should get. And so we figured if we can build a job engine and algorithm to support them, it's going to work for everybody else. And so because we were the technologists who owned that systems, owned that tech, we got to actually build something that worked for a population that was really suffering, as well as for this much broader use case, and raised a ton of money also for the company in terms of revenue.
Yep, absolutely. Do good, and you also do well by the business when you do that.
That's right.
Sure. Let's turn a little bit to the culture and sort of the team you have to build, because none of this happens without that team being in place. So one of the things you often talk about the data scientist playing a role as is the Spock on the bridge, Spock being in reference to Spock in Star Trek. How, in this new Gen AI moment, can we make sure that we're as effective Spocks on the bridge to make sure Gen AI is steered in the right direction?
So the first thing I think is engineers, we love to complain. As data scientists, technologists, we love to complain. We're not in the room. We're not in there. Why aren't we in the room? Like, what prevents us from being in the room? And one of the most powerful things, this dates back to the early days of Facebook, when Jeff Hammerbacher and myself were kind of trying to figure out what job titles to call our teams, and we finally landed on this term data scientist. The thing I think which we saw which was really powerful, is the job took off because people really didn't know what it meant. But honestly, it allowed people to be in the room and people are like, oh, you're smart, you're adding value, you have context. And when you have context, you can actually be helpful. And so the first thing is to figure out how do you get a seat at the table. And oftentimes we're like, well, let's just let the product manager take this or the project manager or somebody else. No, you say the product manager and the technologists need to come to this meeting. They need to be in that room. They need to have the context, because if you don't have the context, you can't actually solve the problem. The second thing is, when you're in that room, have you done all the prep? Have you done all the work to really represent things? Do you know the metrics? Do you understand the business? Very times we're like, we're not going to do the hard work to understand the business. And then we complain people don't understand the technology. Well, those people are also complaining we don't understand their world. Yep. So you've got to get out of your comfort zone and understand the broader thing. And then once you're in there, you have to figure out how you're going to solve the problem. How are you adding value and doing it? And like, people kind of push back on this every time. I tell them, look, if I'm in a meeting with the president, my job is to find a way to add value. And that isn't just by just like speaking up. It's not like you just get room to speak up. You have to add value in those conversations. There's not very much time. The problems are so intense. You have to figure it out. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to solve a problem, but I have an extra angle on this. My angle of attack is I get to bring data to the fight, and I get to use that to try to add value. And so you have to get to the table. You have to earn your keep and keep your place at the table, and then keep moving up by adding value with the technology and the skills that you bring.
Yeah, and so really it is that understanding the overall, the higher level problem we're trying to solve.
That's right.
And always aiming for that. Understanding you have a superpower to add to that, but that superpower should layer up to the bigger thing as well. And don't lose sight of that bigger thing you're going after.
And this would be one of the key things is it's one of the most painful things, and I think a thing that is missing in our educational system is this component of the liberal arts. We don't have people who know how to storytell. We don't have theater. We don't have people who are taking literature or all these other things. You can still do this. It's not too late. Take improv. Do these other classes. That ability to communicate, to create human connection, that's what's needed. If I go into a room with very intense situation, and I pull up a chart and I say, as you can see, that's dead on arrival. Like, if everyone's like, what do you see? Like, that's my pet peeve word is people are like, as you can see in this chart. It's like, no one can see it. You haven't told me. Tell a story, tell a narrative. You may use data to back you up, but figure out how to actually tell a story. And the way to do that is that you find the people that actually are the data points, have their story, bring that story back into the room, and then scale that with data.
Makes sense. Before we close out, we have a big group of data infrastructure professionals here. We have the community gathered in this room today. One of the big strengths in the early days of the data field, data science, back in our LinkedIn era, it's a community we're both part of and we've benefited tremendously from. We have friendships to this day, was that early on we came together across companies. We were solving problems that were much bigger and much more difficult to solve than any one company could get their arms around. And that community aspect of just getting together and solving really hard problems and commiserating together was very helpful in the early days of the data infrastructure industry, data science.
Essential. Couldn't have happened without them.
Absolutely. Now with GenAI today, there is a feeling that this is sort of like our race and everyone needs to win. And I do have some worry that community is not, that same type of community isn't going to take hold. Mm-hmm. I'd love your take on this.
Yeah. I mean, the first version that we think we found, and this was true in the early days of Facebook, LinkedIn, others, is we just got together to chat. Like, we would just get the teams together and just share pizza, Chinese food, you name it. We just get together and trade notes about what's working, what's not. In the AI space, it has been very much a flat out run, but actually far more collaboration is happening, but people don't realize it. I think we need to make it okay to share. We need to find ways to do it. We need to have the conferences, the events, the other type of places where we normalize sharing what works, what doesn't. Why is this so important? It's because this game is so much bigger than just creating an LLM. We have the potential of AGI on the horizon in our lifetime. Like, what is that going to mean? What are those things? We have such big problems. We are going to see climate change causing massive challenges across the world. We're going to have massive migration. We have serious conflicts that are taking place, like we've seen in these gray zone areas, like we're seeing in Ukraine, we're seeing in the Middle East, we're seeing in other places in Latin America. These are the challenges of today. And so, how are we going to be thinking about using these technologies? And how are we going to be able to realize when we have the next pandemic or another issue that we can come together to bring our skills to solve the problems of humanity? That may sound highfalutin, but we just saw it happen.
Yep.
And we saw people rise to the occasion, and technology and everyone sort of shifting gears to help on that front. We need ourselves to realize that there's corporations and there are big entities. I get it. There's job, there's money on the line, but there's something more important. There's relationships, there's people. We are a community. You are more than your company is. You are more than just your job title. We are a community, and we work best when we think about data science, AI. These are team sports. And when we do that, that's when we collectively win. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, what we are going for is to not just win for today. We are here to win for our kids and our kids' kids. And that is on a global scale.
Amazing words to leave us with, DJ. DJ, it's been so much fun joining you here today in conversation at your house on these topics we care so much about. For everyone at Data at Scale, I really hope you take this message forward. You really take forward that we have a big responsibility to play in building the right things, in using people's data responsibly, and understanding that there is a person behind what we're doing. And you bring that community aspect forward so we solve these hard problems together. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Well, that's so fun, as always.